Okay, we're going to go ahead and begin. This is part 5 of the Unit 4 on cell signaling. So Martin Luther King Day is on Monday, so I just thought I'd take a moment to put one of my favorite MLK quotes up. I know we all just think of it as a day off, but I encourage you to take some time to reflect on some of the things that his life's work was all about. So just wanted to throw that in there. You're going to have a day to, probably chill out, but take a moment to read about some things he did. I think that's the least we could do. All right, let me take that down, make this a little bit bigger. Okay. Get my picture out of the way. There we go. All right, we'll go ahead and begin now. So this section is about your body maintaining homeostasis. Okay, homeostasis basically means same state, and it's not that your body always wants to stay exactly the same. It's that it wants to stay in an organized state depending on what's happening in the external and the internal environment. Okay, now I tend to be very human-centric, so plants, bacteria, corals, everything does this, but I'm kind of a human bio guy. All right, so the body, or any other life form, has to be able to monitor its internal conditions at all times. That could be things like how much sugar is inside of your bloodstream, body temperature. Body temperature is one we're going to focus on a lot today. It could be, a bone is broken. There's different, it could be anything, okay? So your body, almost like the thermostat in your house, likes to have different set points for different factors. Okay, so hey, by the way, that note packet has all these notes in it for you to follow along with. Okay, so these set points, don't think of them as necessarily points. Okay, we've all been taking our temperature a lot these past couple year now. So if you've got your little temperature gun like I do here, I can, if I put this in the right mode, take my temperature, and I got 98.1. Now I know these things are not exactly accurate compared to normal thermometers, but we're going to see a range on these things. It's not like every single human being is fighting to get to 98.6 constantly. So as long as your body is within that normal range, it's probably not fighting too hard to get that temperature into that range, okay? So that can fluctuate a little bit depending on the individual and your individual circumstances, okay? You start exercising, it's probably going to go up a little bit from all that metabolic activity that's happening in your body. So think of these set points not only for temperature. Temperature's one we've all been familiar with since we were little kids and we got fevers and things like that. So it's easy to understand. There are set points for so many different factors. This is just one of them. Okay. So that homeostasis is a huge theme throughout this entire course and throughout the entire field of biology. Okay. So what we're looking for here is stability. Okay, we want things to stay within those parameters of that set point. Okay, how are we going to do that? Organisms are going to first detect, okay, so some sort of sensory mechanism within cells, and a lot of times we think of detecting as like, well, I can hear, I can see, but this is also on a cellular level as well. So the big thing for homeostasis, think of it as balance, keeping everything in your body balanced, okay? A lot of disease and even death are the result of things getting totally out of balance, okay? You start working out, your oxygen levels drop, your body's like, you better breathe a little harder, breathe a little deeper, breathe a little faster, okay? So your body's trying to maintain that level of balance of oxygen in your bloodstream. Too much oxygen can be bad. Okay, how are we going to do this? Well, it's something called feedback loops, okay? So a feedback loop is when some stimulus gets sent to a control signal and a reaction tries to get that stimulus or I'm sorry, some factor back into its normal range, okay? So the feedback loop that is easy for everybody to understand is the thermostat in your house, okay? You come home and you don't like the temperature, you either turn it up or down, okay? And so what happens is the furnace comes on. This time of year it's the furnace. And the furnace runs until the thermostat gets into some normal range. Now, I know everybody has different feelings about thermostats, and mom and dad and whoever are probably always arguing about where it's supposed to be. But let's say you leave your thermostat on 70. The furnace will run until the house gets up to 70 degrees. And most furnaces only run at one speed. So if you're like, it's really cold in here, let's turn it up to 95. The furnace can't run faster. It's just going to run until the house gets to 95. So if you forget, you're going to get uncomfortable and you're going to have to turn it back down. So it's usually best to set it at one point and just wait for it to do its thing. I know in the car it can be a little bit different. You have like max AC, but most home cooling and heating systems only run at one speed. Most. There's some nice ones that have like overdrive. All right. So there's two types of feedback, negative and positive. Don't think of these as like, hey, Mr. Sater's going to give me some feedback on my project, and it was pretty negative. It was bad. Or, man, I got some feedback on, that dinner I cooked my parents, and it was really positive. That's not what the positive and negative mean here, okay? Don't think of these positives and negatives as good or bad. Just want to throw that out there. Taught feedback for many, many years. And many students start thinking that, well, one is good and one is bad. And that makes sense. It says negative and positive, and that's how we think of those words in our brain. Think of negative and positive more mathematically here, like directions, okay? What directions are things going? So feedback loops are not good or bad. They just go in different directions. Okay, so some things you got to know. Stimulus, okay? That's the variable that will cause a response. It might be low blood sugar. It might be, how much salt is in you've consumed. Okay? You eat a lot of salty food, you get thirsty. Okay? So your body's trying to correct that. Your body's like, hey, all this salt needs washed out. So it sends you a signal, hey, we need some water, and you drink some. Okay? A receptor or sensor, okay? This is going to be, in this class, it's usually on a cellular level, but on an organism level, it's usually the brain, okay? That thirst one is a good example of one that's in your brain. If you haven't looked outside yet, it is snowing really, really hard. But it's nothing's holding to the ground yet. Sorry, I've got a little weather thing that I'm really fascinated by weather. All right. Some other terms you want to know. Effector, okay? And this is, you got to be careful with this. It's almost like English class with affect, effect. So effector, kind of over-pronouncing it there. Effector is the thing that responds, okay? Usually a muscle or a gland. On a cellular level, it's usually the operation of some sort of signal transduction pathway. All right. Pacing okay, guys? Can I get all right, good. All right, response.
Slide a little longer.
Leave the slide up a little longer, is that what you said?
Yes.
Yeah, you got it. I know, I feel like I'm going a little fast. I'll try to slow down. a response, okay? Now, don't mix up effector and response, okay? Effector is like, what is doing it. Response is what it does, okay? So effector is like, your pancreas. What it does is release insulin. The response is to release insulin, okay? All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on, unless somebody says wait. All right. So let's start with negative feedback. We're going to start with negative feedback because it's the most common. Negative feedback is stabilizing. Negative feedback is usually the opposite happens. Think of your thermostat in your house. The house gets cold, the furnace turns on. Okay? So that's negative feedback. We're trying to make the cold go away. We're trying to get back to normal. I've heard of cases where people working on furnaces and air conditioners accidentally hook them up wrong. And then the house, they accidentally wire the air conditioner to the furnace feed and vice versa. When the house gets cold, the air conditioner turns on. That's not negative feedback, okay? We'll talk about what that would do here in a moment. So, negative feedback is tries to get things back to a normal state. If you want to add a key word for negative feedback, it would be stabilizing, okay? Negative feedback is stabilizing. So, it's the most common type of feedback in biology. Why is that? Because most things want to be stable, okay? Your body doesn't want to spin out of control. So almost all biological feedback is negative. I only know of a couple that are positive, and we'll talk about them. All right? Here's some examples, okay? So that feedback reduces the effect of stimulus, okay? It gets cold, the furnace turns on, and that reduces the coldness, okay? I know we're not going to get into the physics of hot and cold, and you don't really reduce cold, but just keep it on a simple level for now. Okay, some examples of that are sweating. You get hot, you sweat cools you down, you're trying to get back to a normal temperature. Blood sugar. I have a tiny little homework for you that you're going to do after this lecture on how insulin is regulated. Breathing rate. You go out, you sprint, you run, your oxygen levels are going to drop, your body's going to demand more oxygen, and your breathing rate's going to go up. It's really hard to control that breathing rate, okay? When your body wants air, it's going to tell you, breathe, okay? And that's a hard instinct to fight, hard signal to fight.
Mr. Sater, so like what you mean by blood sugar is like if the insulin level in the body increases, then
blood sugar drops.
Blood sugar drops. Okay.
A lot of diabetics will track how many grams of carbs they eat, and they'll adjust their insulin dose based on how many grams of carbs they eat. If you've ever seen people with the little insulin pumps, some of those, they can dial that up manually, but there are new ones with a sensor they'll it's just like a thermostat. Blood sugar has gone up, send some insulin until blood sugar drops down. So those insulin pumps, way more high tech. If you've ever seen anybody wear one, just like the size of an old iPod, and it just pumps the medicine into you as you need it. It's much, much more stable. In the old days, they would just be like, just take some twice a day. And that could, if you give someone insulin, they don't have any sugar or very little bit of sugar in their body, you can make them extremely hypoglycemic, and their blood sugar level gets so low that their behavior is affected, and they have all kinds of symptoms that you'll notice. All right, here's a familiar friend to all of us from our childhood. So we're going to go with body temperature as an example for negative feedback. So we'll call this Patrick that we started off with here Happy Patrick. Happy Patrick is at a temperature he likes. Let's just go with human body temperature. Starfish in actuality are the same temperature as the environment, but we're going to pretend like Patrick's just like us. Okay? So what I really want you to focus here on is not really the process, but the terms, because I am incredibly sure you know what the process is going. The process is really quick. Is you get hot, you sweat, you cool down. That's the process. But let's pay attention to terms, okay? Instead of you get hot. First term is stimulus. Stimulus is the term I want you to know. Well, what's the stimulus? The stimulus is heat. Okay, so heat is the external factor. Could be an internal factor. All right, what are the receptors? You have temperature receptors in your skin that don't just tell you like, hey, that's hot, stay away from it, or hey, it's really cold, put on a hat or whatever, but they also drive a feedback loop, okay? The effector, that is the target gland that we want to activate, okay? The response, sweat. Okay, this really makes sense. But listen, the terms I want you to know are up there in order. Stimulus, receptor, effector, response. SRER, SRER, okay? So what's going to happen to our little buddy Happy Patrick? He's hot. He's going to sweat. We're going to get sweaty Patrick, okay? Next, let's do the other side. Okay, and remember, we're trying to stay at a set point. So that means we can either get too hot or too cold. Okay, we want to keep it Goldilocks. Everything is just right. This time, Patrick, the stimulus is cold. Same receptors. Okay, the same receptors. Now, there's no such thing as reverse sweating, but what does your body do when it gets cold?
Shiver.
Yes, okay. So shivering is the muscles. Shivering is one of the best ways to burn calories. There's this, if you've had my class before, I've talked about there's these people that came up with this diet where they're just cold all the time. You sleep with no blankets, you take cold showers. You don't have to like dip yourself in ice, but you're basically trying to shiver as much as you can. And these people lose incredible amounts of weight. Now it's very uncomfortable, okay? So imagine just basically sleeping in your underwear with no blankets in a room with the AC on max. It's not comfortable, but it works. Okay. I grew up on a farm, and the colder it gets outside, the more hay the cows eat because they shiver more, so they need more calories. It's kind of, you got to feed them more when it's cold outside. Or if you've ever played outside in the snow all day, you come in, you're starving to death. If you've ever swam all day, if you're a swimmer, water temperature, even though it's warm, it still takes a lot of energy for your body to cope with that. All right, so our response is shivering. So we have shivering Patrick. The big theme here is know the SRER, stimulus, receptor, effector, response. So be able to trace those through a cycle. What's the stimulus? What's the receptor? What's the effector? What's the response? Okay? So that's my negative feedback example. It's pretty cut and dry. It's pretty easy. All right, let's go through positive feedback. Very, very rare in biology, and it's destabilizing, okay? The only examples that I know of in biology, and there might be one or two I'm missing, but child labor, okay? We're going to talk about that one in great detail. So the next one is breastfeeding or lactation, whatever you want to call it. The more the baby eats, the more milk you make. And if you think about it like this, if you have a baby that's 1 day old, you're breastfeeding, it's not going to eat as much as a baby that's like 4 months old. So the more the baby eats, the more milk your body produces until you say stop, and then that collapses. Child labor collapses in a sudden change. Breastfeeding collapses in a sudden change. Blood clotting, hopefully, if you're bleeding, it'll sort of cut itself off. Now, I'm sort of a human biology guy, but one example that comes up a lot on the AP test is fruit ripening. Fruit, when they get ripe, give off this gas called ethylene gas, and it will make the other fruit around them give it off too. So the more gas it's given off, the more gas the other fruits give off. So the faster fruit gets ripe, the faster the fruit around it gets ripe. It's like a snowball effect. If you've seen the cartoon, they put the little snowball, it gets bigger, bigger, bigger. So that's positive feedback. Positive feedback, think of that snowball effect. All the snowballs always crash at the end in the cartoon. Okay, so positive feedback systems, they are, if you're taking notes, write down destabilizing. They are going to lead to some sort of crash or collapse or abrupt ending. Okay? So,
Mr. Sater, what did you say for taking notes? Can you repeat that
if you're
again?
taking notes, write down destabilizing. Destabilizing.
For which one?
Positive. All of these are destabilizing. Okay? There is no child labor that just stabilizes and says, well, the baby's like right there, we'll just let it stop. No. Child labor ends very abruptly. Okay? All right, so child labor is what we're going to go with today, okay? I just want to kind of do a term review, okay? If you're not sure about child labor anatomy, here's what you've got. You've got a uterus, okay? And don't make fun of my drawings. This is where the baby grows, okay? You've got a cervix, okay? That's kind of like the door into the uterus, okay? And then you've got vagina, which is sort of the pathway to the outside. Everybody should understand that. The word I'm going to talk about a lot today is cervix, okay? And how many of you have maybe had a friend or an older sister or whatever in labor, and they'll say, like, she's 5 centimeters, she's 4, you know, what they're talking about is how big around the opening of the cervix is, okay? And usually that goes anywhere from like 1 to 10, okay? 10 centimeters, it's at the point, you know, where the baby is coming, and they don't usually make that number bigger than 10. So when she gets up to 10 centimeters, the cervix is all the way open, the baby is coming, okay? So I just want to review that because we're going to kind of talk about, well, what happens to the cervix in particular during childbirth, okay? All right. So here's a little cartoon of childbirth, okay? So just to kind of review, the cervix is right there, okay? Now, in childbirth, toward the end, the baby running out of room is a stimulus that gets childbirth started. So that's the first thing that happens, okay? The baby running out of room causes uterus muscles to contract. So all the muscles of the uterus up here are, Dahlia, can you mute if you don't need me? Anyway, Dahlia, are you there? Can you mute? Thanks. All right. So anyway, the muscles of the uterus start contracting, which is going to cause the baby to push on the cervix. Okay. So we have the baby pushing on the cervix. So that's our stimulus. The cervix getting pushed on is a stimulus. Okay. Next. Nerves in the cervix send a signal to the brain. Okay. And that signal is going to be your pituitary. The effector is the pituitary releasing, let me move my picture out of the way, releasing a hormone called oxytocin. Okay? Now, this is a huge surge of oxytocin compared to oxytocin is a hormone that's present in everyday physiology. This is the hormone that makes you feel like you're in love. So if you've ever crushed on someone really hard, or you know, that first kiss or that whatever, it's usually caused by this hormone here, this is kind of cool because it makes mom bond to the baby really hard. You have like this big sort of like attachment thing that happens. Now, that's just a side effect that I don't want to get into too far, but the response of oxytocin is for the uterus to contract more. Okay? So if the uterus contracts more, what's going to happen to the cervix? Okay? Well, baby's going to push more. The receptors are going to send more of this hormone. The response is going to be more contractions. Now, if you've ever been around someone who's entering childbirth, what do they always ask? How far apart are the contractions? Okay? And there's a point, I don't remember what they are. When my wife was pregnant, we knew them like right now. But they'll say, are the contractions this far apart and lasting this long? So what's happening is the feedback cycle is shortening and childbirth happens, okay? Because the feedback cycle gets shorter and shorter and shorter. So if you're ever around someone who's pregnant and they're kind of like, I'm in contractions. Okay, if you just have one, the feedback cycle is not going to get going. But if those contractions are lasting longer and getting closer and closer together, this feedback cycle is accelerating, okay? And again, it ends in a crash. The crash is the baby comes out, the cervix no longer is getting those signals, and it all stops. Now, has anyone ever heard of a woman going into the hospital to have the baby and things aren't going very well and they give her a drug? That drug is a mimic of this cycle. It's called Pitocin. It's an oxytocin sort of, it's an artificial oxytocin that makes this happen. So the doc can put you on this Pitocin to get your contractions going. Because sometimes they don't want the baby to sit there in labor forever. Maybe the baby's head is pushing on the cord and it's not getting a good supply of blood. So there's times where we want to artificially speed this up. A lot of docs don't like to do that. They like to let things progress naturally. That's really a doctor's decision on how to do that. They can also just say, you're not going into labor for whatever reason. We're just going to make it happen by putting you on that. Okay? A lot of docs don't like to do that either. Okay? All right. So that's your positive feedback. And remember, you've got that SRER here. Stimulus receptor effector response. Okay. So there are a ton of reasons why the body might not be able to regulate homeostasis, okay? Tons. You guys just did big projects on a disease where this broke down. So the most common reasons for homeostatic imbalances are listed here. Almost all of yours were genetic, okay? So genetic disorders where the body doesn't make one of these signaling proteins, the receptor could be broken, your body might not make the ligands properly. Where that breakdown could happen is pretty broad, but you're basically having some sort of misformed, poorly formed protein that causes it not to work. All right. The next set of homeostatic imbalances are drug and alcohol abuse, okay? Almost all recreational drugs temporarily do something to a pathway that makes you feel, for a very short time, some target feeling you're trying to get, whether it's an up or down or whatever. If you keep doing that, those pathways break down, okay? The drug I like to abuse is coffee, okay? Coffee, basically, the caffeine causes your brain to block the signal for tiredness. Your brain responds by growing more tired receptors. So now, when you don't have coffee, you get tired and cranky very, very easily. I literally ran out of coffee today, and I had to scrounge around the whole school for an extra K-cup because I have that problem. It's one that's socially acceptable. All right. The next one is intolerable conditions, okay? This is where we take something and we put it into a situation where no matter how healthy it is, it just can't keep up with homeostasis. Really simple examples would be like, I'm going to take you, put you in a swimming suit, and drop you off in Antarctica. Okay, it's like -70 or something down there. So you're going to shiver, but eventually your shivering can't keep up. Okay. Another example is you hear about these people leaving pets in cars where it's extremely hot. They're going to sweat, they're going to pant, but they can't keep up, and it kills them. Okay. And there are lots of ways this can happen. Those are just two of the easy to understand ones. Other ones might be like bleeding. I'm bleeding so profusely that my blood can't clot, and eventually there's not enough blood to supply the oxygen to my brain to keep me alive. Homeostasis collapses and you die. So a lot of causes of death are intolerable conditions where your heart stops, poisons. It could be lots of different things. All right. So most diseases are when your body can't maintain homeostasis. And some of the most common problems in society, health-wise, are the disease is cancer, where your body can't regulate cell growth. Your cells grow uncontrollably, and the cells that do grow are non-functional. It's not like if you have brain cancer, you grow an extra part of your brain that does calculus better, okay? So cancer treatments have gotten way better over my lifetime. And a lot of what's going on with this COVID vaccine, this is going to be a game changer, okay? COVID vaccine is putting mRNA into cells and making those cells do things that they didn't do before. So this COVID vaccine is it's going to be used in other areas of healthcare in the next couple of years, I'm sure. Diabetes, we can't regulate blood glucose. When blood glucose goes high, your body gets really bad at fighting infections. The people with diabetes, they're always checking your toes to see if your toes have good sense of touch, because it starts on your extremities. A lot of diabetics will get these sores on their feet, to do amputations and things like that. It can be pretty bad. Okay. So cell signaling, this is sort of a big theme here. Cell signaling, cells have to communicate to maintain homeostasis. You can't keep things balanced without knowing where you are, okay? You can't keep things balanced without your body saying, we need sugar, we don't need sugar. We need oxygen, we don't need oxygen. We are hot, we are cold, okay? Cells have to be able to do this in order for you to stay alive, okay? Anything that messes up cell communication is a disease, and there will be negative side effects, okay? So this is just a review of the first 5 parts of this chapter. We call these things signal transduction pathways. You should have a really good idea of how those work right now, okay? Signal receptor response. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop my recording. We'll get this on